kind of leadership here. And I'm going to call this person the ringmaster, but really it's also a big chunk of office gossip, right? And what's kind of interesting is that there are two situations here that basically feed into each other, right? Now, we're not talking about the Hobbit here. There's no My Precious. There's no Gollum. There's no running through the backwoods trying to get to Mordor here. What's really interesting is that you kind of have two different things going on. You may have a boss who gossips, and you may have coworkers that gossip up to the boss. And these may actually be live agents. The boss may be recruiting these people to find out what's going on within the organization in order to manipulate or find a way to get what they want. This is a really normal survival technique in a company, right? Because we all have that shadow organization. You may have the formal organization chart, but we know that there's a shadow organization that really runs the company. There are interactions between other managers and other employees, which is how work actually really gets done. And any manager worth their salt is going to be plugged into that side channel, right? They're literally going to be a big part of that side channel, and hearing what other managers are saying and then relying on agents to try to bubble up common employee information. Right? Now, this requires the willing cooperation of the manager and other workers, keeping the manager informed, but it can also lead to that idea of an office tattletale situation where you have an office tattletale that will go and run to the boss over every little thing that they happen to see. And again, not uncommon, we deal with this when we're dealing with children, right? Because this is really a play on your emotions and on our sense of ethics. Right? You may see a coworker accidentally take home a pen, use the office phone for personal reasons. Man, I worked at a company where they said you can't use your personal company to shop Amazon, but they would waive that requirement from Thanksgiving to Christmas. So you had a time where it was okay to shop Amazon on your work computer because everyone understood you're working 10 to 12-hour days, but the rest of the year it wasn't okay to do it. So you kind of ended up with kind of these lurchy kind of things. Well, it was December 26th at 1 minute past midnight, and this employee is still shopping Amazon. Well, okay, darn, right? Now, someone in the office might think this is egregious and want to tell the boss about it because it's against the rules, right? And there are some people that are really wedded to rules. I am a rule-based person. I like rules. Right? Or it may go against their sense of ethics. For me, these are little gray areas. I don't care if an employee accidentally takes home a pen. I don't care if they're using their office phone for personal reasons because schools are going to call up and want you to come pick up their kid. You may have your cell phone off or maybe buried in a desk drawer or something. So they're going to call you at your work phone. There are things that are going to happen that kind of make these rules that they say no personal blah 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 really kind of a gray area. It's something that you're going to do anyways because you're going to give out your work phone to school and doctors and other people. You may have it programmed up in your phone as an alternative emergency contact number, right? So there's lots of reasons why you're going to do this, even though it's against the rules, and in some cases an ethical violation because you're violating a policy. Now, if this is egregious to you and you think this is absolutely unfair because you can't take an office pen because you feel guilty about it, you're going to get annoyed and then you're going to tattletale, especially if someone's doing something that you want to do, but because of religious, moral, or ethical issues, you're like trying to enforce your sense of worth or your sense of life on someone else's way of doing things. And this is really common. It's not unusual. It may not be about you. It's all about the office tattletale. Because people get annoyed at work for some of the most interesting reasons. And that's kind of how this works. People just get annoyed, period, because they're having a bad day. Now, the other thing, too, is that we're going to talk about our coworkers during our one-on-ones with the boss. That one-on-one with your boss is a really interesting source of intel, not just on how you're doing with your projects, but how you feel about your coworkers. You may complain about Johnny not holding up their end of the project. Man, Johnny's just not delivering when I need him to deliver, doing what I need him to do. And you may be woefully unaware that Johnny's got some issues going on right now. He's got a family member who's dying. He may have some drug or drink issues. His child may have been in an accident. He's not going to focus on work. He's going to be focused more on something else. Now, your boss may not know what's going on, but if enough people complain about Johnny not holding up their end of the work, well, that becomes a performance-related issue. Now you're just compounding a problem that Johnny wanted to keep kind of private and kind of quiet and kind of not involved with the boss, right? Or involved with work. And I get that, and that's cool. So when you're in there complaining about your coworkers, with your boss on that one-on-one, your boss may use that information for purposes that you didn't see coming. And there's kind of two examples on this. And Sukowitz kind of came up with these kind of interesting based on real world. One of them is pretty obvious, good choice, good decision. The other one's kind of like, no, wait, there's not enough information here. So the first one for me that doesn't have enough information is New York Times reporter Susan Sach, right? So she was accused of sending people emails, people's spouses emails saying your husband or your spouse is having an affair. But she says she didn't do it. She's still fired for something that she may or may not have done. According to the information, New York Times wasn't going to discuss why they fired her, what evidence they had, or anything else. They just said, at will employment, thank you very much for your time, have a great day. So they're kind of left out in the lurch, right? But that's because people inside were talking about what was going on, and someone thought she was the person that did these things. And there's no proof or evidence that's been presented that shows that this happened, right? And again, when the company's not discussing it, there's no real way of finding out what you've got going on. Now, the other one, this is more cut and dry. Even though it came from an anonymous tip, right? Probably a lot of people in the office knew about the boss, the CEO, sleeping and having an affair with a subordinate. Now, generally, that's a bad thing to do, right? And again, the company thought it was more about poor judgment of leadership than anything else. And they didn't talk about violating company policy. They just said poor judgment out of a CEO. But the thing is that came from an anonymous tip that ended up happening. And this is actually really kind of interesting because I would lay odds that in that office, in that booming office, a lot of people knew about this. There was a lot of gossip going on about this because your boss disappears for a couple hours every couple of days, and along with a subordinate, people start putting two and two together and they start talking about it. Well, why is this and about that? And how can they get this special treatment and blah, blah, blah. Until finally someone twigs and says, hey, let's just do an anonymous tip and call it good, right? So it's kind of interesting on how that gossip can actually lead to some really interesting conclusions, whether they're true or false or debatable. So there are really some effects here, right? You may have a person that's spending a little bit extra time taking lunch every Wednesday, every other Wednesday. And that's kind of annoying because you want to take extra time off at lunch on Wednesdays and not have to come back to the office right away. What you may not know is that that employee that's taking the extra time is going through chemo or going through dialysis or something else. That if you knew the backstory, you'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But because that person wants to keep that private, it just looks like they're taking extra time. So instead of extra time or trying to improve morale, this coworker is at the boss tattletaling. And then the boss is using that information saying, oh, it's impacting performance of the team. And all because the person has got cancer or kidney disease or something else and they are going to the doctor and they just didn't want to talk about it. Now you've got something that was completely innocent and completely private. And because the boss is now in there going, oh, I have a chance to reduce my head count, boom, save the company money for healthcare, boom, I'm pretty good. And don't be surprised if you do have a medical issue, right? That the boss will go, oh, performance. We'll just ding you on performance because then it won't look like retaliation and it won't look like an illegal fire. They think like this, right? Now, when you're doing these kinds of things or when your boss is doing these kinds of things, again, the idea here is not to better the organization, not to improve performance, not to improve morale. It's really about someone else's feelings, right? Whether they got slighted or hurt in some way. That motive can really be that idea of I'm going to tell mommy on you kind of behavior. It's appealing to a higher authority to step in and solve a problem for the complainer. And that complainer can be your boss, or that complainer can be a coworker feeding information to your boss and then something bad happening. So this whole gossip thing, that ringmaster kind of thing, really can become a problem because if the boss is manipulative on top of it, you end up at a really unhappy workplace almost overnight because bosses will use information to their best effect to get what they want. They really do this. Now, if you're telling the boss, really when a coworker is doing this, they're basically reliving their childhood, right? I'm going to tell mommy on you. I'm going to tell daddy on you. Because to them, something seemingly innocent can seem so unfair that the only recourse is to talk to the manager about it. I'm going to complain to the manager. Now, all of a sudden, you have a performance issue or you have an ethical issue or why did you steal that pen, right? And it's all because someone felt slighted or felt it was unfair, or that employee's motivation was to exert control over other workers by hurting someone. And there are coworkers and bosses that are manipulative enough that they just simply just want to hurt someone today and get them fired or alter the trajectory of their life in some way that makes them feel like they have control over someone else, not realizing that this causes a really bad work environment. Now, how the boss's reaction to all this information being fed up to them by other coworkers or other stuff through that office gossip grapevine, which is everywhere, is how do bosses use this information? Now, what's interesting is that the more negative things you hear about a person, you build a bias against that person. You're like, oh, wow, well, John said Danny's horrible, or Janie said that June is horrible. And you start to build this bias. And that bias, we really bake those into our brain, right? So if the company's doing a mass firing or a mass layoff, right, the employees who have a worse relationship with their boss are the first to go. And this is a really common kind of issue that goes along with building out those reputations in the long run. So it's the boss's issue to run the shop, but it doesn't mean that other employers are not out there trying to manipulate the boss into getting something. So if a employee hates the coworker that they've got, they will complain to the boss about how horrible that coworker is. That's going to build up a bias. They're going to try to manipulate the boss into getting something that they want, which is often that that coworker leaves. And the boss has an issue with ethics, trust, or other issues, that boss can just become a puppet. It becomes an agent of that coworker that's engaged in the office gossip. So you really need two to tango on this one, and then you need someone to become the target of all this office gossip, because that's really how this whole process is going to work. Now, what's interesting is that your boss, when they're the gossip themselves, Ida Prasadi in 2018 said that gossip is the most aggressive bullying ever, because your boss is talking about you to others behind your back. So instead of dealing with this in a one-on-one with you, trying to deal with it at the lowest common level, they're out there water cooler talking with other people, whether it's your other coworkers or whether it's your other bosses or the other bosses within the organization. So if you saw your boss comes up to you and says, hey, do you know why Johnny's always late on Monday mornings? Well, Johnny may have to go and take care of his sick mom on Monday mornings. And if you say, well, I don't know, or you say, well, Johnny's just late all the time, you've now fed into your boss's paradigms. But you and the boss are now talking about someone behind their back. So instead of going and talking to Johnny directly to find out why Johnny's late on Monday mornings, he's just asking you, do you know why, instead of working with Johnny. So if you want trust, this is going to be the way it's not going to happen. Because if your boss is spreading rumors and innuendo, are you going to trust that boss? I sure wouldn't. I mean, honestly, right? It's going to influence your relations with other workers. If your boss is talking bad about your coworkers, that builds in a bias. You're going to feed on that. And you may talk about other things because you're kind of going along with the team and blah, 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 right? When that's going on, that work environment becomes really horrible, and the person's probably going to go, right? Because you don't want that kind of pedestal, and you certainly don't want to be in that kind of negative spotlight for whatever reason's going on. And again, you don't know what's going on with that other person. You just know what's being said in the gossip. So you have a filtered or biased view of what's going on. And that can become a real problem later on, because other people may be documenting this. Now, you've heard me say document's important here because a lot like a parent-child relationship, a boss-employee relationship has a huge power differential. It's like an instructor and student relationship. You can really manipulate that to someone's effect or someone's interaction beyond just the day-to-day and have an impact into career choice, career progression, pay, longevity at the job. There's a lot of things that office gossip can kill. And if your boss is in there being the office gossip, are you going to trust that boss who's talking bad about Johnny and Janie all the time into thinking that he's not talking about you to Johnny and Janie? Again, it kills your team interaction. It kills your day-to-day interaction. There's a lot of just negative repercussions that come from this. Now, there are some things you can do. And the first one is get out of the immediate firing line. Become boring. Right? And what I mean by this is that your boss is going to gossip And there's very little you can do because it's probably baked into their personality. And if they're not gossiping at work, they're gossiping at home, they're gossiping wherever they are on the weekend. They may even be gossiping at church. This is just who they are. But the problem is that your boss or your coworker has some filtered data about everyone in the work group. It may not necessarily reflect the true reality. It reflects someone's opinion. Now, the other thing too is distract from the person being gossiped about. That's just, don't be the person. If you can, just remember you're not family here, right? If you can keep your distance and be professional, that's really a good point. But sometimes you may have to take that by the horns and say, well, it's not really that way, right? You may need to die to diffuse and dispel that office gossip. Don't tell your stories at work. Don't talk about your family. Don't talk about your car. Don't talk about your kids. Don't talk about work. Don't talk about anything. Don't tell your stories. Because if there's a leak in the system, then you become an object of office gossip again. And if you're a person that's either black rock or gray rock here working, then the minute you crack and you say something, well, my kid's a little sick, all of a sudden that gets blown out of proportion, right? And if your boss is the office gossip, all of a sudden you're getting cards from your coworkers say, sorry, your kid is dying, when your kid just has the cold, right? Again, information kind of happens. Now, the other thing too is that people will move on if you're not an interesting source of gossip. So black rock, gray rock technologies really work here from that viewpoint. It's a really kind of good way of approaching it. The other one you can do is just focus on your job, right? You're not here to gossip. You're not here to make friends. You're just here to do your job, collect a paycheck, and do your work, right, to the best of your ability. And those are really good, sharp boundaries for yourself to have, right? They really are. Focus on what you do well, do your job. Try to stay out of the office gossip. Now, when you get off work and you have to vent, find a really absolutely safe place where you cannot be overheard, right? Because you don't want to become that target. You don't want to become the target of your boss or anyone else, but you're going to have frustration you're going to need to work out. Now, the other thing, and I've seen actually people do this, and it's really kind of scary, is they left their journal, they left their documentation out. And so I had a separate journal, and I left it on my desk unattended one day. And I found one of my coworkers going through my journal, what was going on at work, and it freaked them out. Why are you keeping track of all this stuff about your boss and your coworkers? What's this about me? Dude, I left that job like really, really quickly because now it looked like I was collecting documentation and now it was scary to the company, right? Because I have a lot of information in there. So don't leave your journal unattended. Don't leave your personal diary out because it can really freak people out. But do keep your documentation. Just keep it kind of quiet so it doesn't become a part of office gossip. Because the minute people find out, it's like you're talking about all the things that you're doing and all the people that you're meeting with, and people interpret that wrong, they really freak out. I mean, they just go crazy. And then they go running off to the boss, or they go running off to HR, or you get an anonymous tip line that you're collecting intelligence on all the employees in the company, and what horrible thing are you going to do about it? Now, the other thing too, and I find this really interesting, is don't get baited. So not that managers are manipulative, but they will find a way to press every button you've got, right? So they're going to try to get a reaction out of you so you can be gossiped about. Black rock, gray rock works here. Don't react. Don't do anything. Go home and vent. Keep your journal. Don't ever let your journal be unattended. Don't even let people know you've got a journal if you can. But the other thing too is you can't avoid gossip. We all talk about everybody else, right? I don't even work at a company, and I've still got friends at the company that I don't work at anymore. And we're talking every day, and I get office gossip, and I'm not even a member of the company, right? Now, you can try to be as boring as humanly possible so you don't get involved in it. If you're not an interesting person to the office gossip will move past you. And that's one of those really things. Just lie low, keep your head low, keep your everything down, and just do your job. Be boring. Gray rock, black rock, if you can. So, exit plan. Now, the interesting part about this is that if it's not a problem for you, then you're fine. If you're used to this, you've got good coping mechanisms, you really like what you do, you're okay with it, you know the office is going to gossip about anything anyways, and it's not causing you problems, you stick around, right? But always have an exit plan. Always have an exit plan. Because you never know how that kind of environment is going to turn. Any work environment that makes you uncomfortable can turn really, really quickly and just force you to kind of either leave or quit or something else. So again, as long as you can manage and cope in that environment, have an exit plan. Because really what you want is you want your best landing, right? You want your soft landing. You want to be able to go from one job to another job, right? So as long as you can put up with it, go and work on your exit plan. Just do it, because it'll just make your life easier. And no one wants to work for a boss that's really just a gossip and just wants to talk about other people all day long, because that really does undermine teamwork. It really does undermine team cohesiveness, right? And again, something may be going on, whether it's medical or family or something else, that the boss just doesn't know about, and it's none of their darn business, right? Why you took FEMLA, Family Emergency Leave Act, but they're going to gossip about it anyways. So again, just kind of interesting. And this is one of those things where you might actually have the luxury of time to deal with your gossipy boss.